have a beeper because you're waiting for food. Look at it right now, and on the right side of the beeper is a button. Yes? Okay, so if your beeper starts beeping because your food is ready, you can press that button and it'll stop making noise. Okay? This is very, very, very important. So when your food is ready, you can press that button, and then you can go get your food, and it'll still be there for you. So that's the first, most important announcement for the evening, probably. The second announcement that I want to make is just a reminder for everybody that our next event, our next Nerd Night event is going to be February 8th, so a couple Fridays from now, and we're going to have 3 really awesome talks. The first one is about proteins and love, the second is about epigenetics, and we're going to finish up with wildlife filming, videography. So bring your Valentines. It's just before Valentine's Day, and there's going to be a little bit of a Valentine theme for that protein talk. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our speaker this evening. So this is a really special event. This is a little bit separate than our other events because we have more time. We only have 1 speaker tonight. So our speaker this evening is Dr. Daniel Brody. He is a professor at the Okinawa Institute, or sorry, not that one, sorry, Okinawa Christian University. He was raised in Pennsylvania. He went to college at Norwich University in Vermont. And then he went to grad school, did his doctorate all the way down in Australia. He's former U.S. Army. He served in Panama and Korea. And he's been here in Okinawa for 25 years. His research integrates studying imagery and studying propaganda, and he's interested in how people use language. So without too much further ado, I'm going to turn over the microphone to him, but I just wanted to let everybody know that he is in a band, and his band is playing tomorrow night at Beer, B-E-E-A-R in Futenma. So if you want more, so if you want more, you can go out tomorrow night too and see him again. So, okay, thank you so much.
Check. Good evening. Top of the evening to you. Top of the evening to you. Usually when I give a talk, I try to break the ice by going around having my students introduce themselves. Would anyone like to introduce him or herself? You're here because maybe you saw the advertisement and you thought, wow, this seems kind of interesting. The title, that struck you as fascinating? No? Anyone? Okay, would you?
My name is Robert. I'm the drummer in Dan's band, and it's going to be a crazy party tomorrow night at Beer. You guys should come. That's it. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for that. Anyone else?
Quick thing. You actually taught my wife at university.
Oh my God.
You probably don't remember.
What's her name?
Johanna Yamashiro.
I know her.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Whoa, tell her I said hi. Okay, well, I'll just maybe break the ice myself. My name's Dan. I go by Dan. I tend to. My students know me as Dan. I've been in Okinawa, as Maggie said, about 25 years. Let's see. I was originally a painter and a sculptor. I started out in my formative years in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. I really loved painting and sculpture because my dad came out of World War II, and he went straight into the steel mills in Pittsburgh, and he really encouraged his kids to not go into the steel corporation and not respect the sciences, but try to be a human being, a good person. My dad and my uncles, they all served World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And my dad was a huge impression, had a huge impression on me, and he really encouraged me to study the arts and the humanities. So that's pretty much what I did. I went off to college thinking I'm going to study, I'm going to be a painter and a sculptor, maybe like Picasso someday, and actually earn some money. That didn't really work out. So I changed my major study in my second year of college, and I thought maybe being a little more pragmatic, maybe I can make a living by writing. So I focused a lot on writing and wanting to be a journalist after graduation. After graduation in '86, finding myself in a huge pile of debt to the banks, I joined the military, and it was a really, really fascinating time, fascinating 7 years, and I learned a lot in the military, and I saw some really interesting things that I still can't erase from memory, but that's another story. So after I got out, I started teaching with University of Maryland in Korea, and I came here in '95 with Maryland. So been here ever since. And what I'd like to do is just present some of my latest research. My background, my doctoral work is in psycholinguistics, but I'm really interested, I've become more interested over the past 15 years in image and text, text being signs and symbols, and how people in places of power use language to kind of get their way. So I want to just present some of the things that I've been looking into recently, and then open it up for some conversation. Since I'm so interested in language, in text and image, I've prepared a talk that incorporates these two things. So please bear with me as I follow my script and show you some of the images that I put together. Okay, so as a survivor of combat operations, I'm interested in language and human behavior, ways in which we can most accurately describe how people, especially those in power, use language, and what that use entails for us all. I'm interested in how language reflects and shapes what we perceive to be real and true and just. I've also thought about, why am I so fascinated by these aspects of cognition? Well, when I was much younger, after my comrades and I conducted bomb assessments of Panama City, saw the corpses after the fighting came to a close, I remember two soldiers in special ops wondering aloud why they were in theater. And the reply that one of them made has been very difficult to erase from memory. The reply was very banal, but quite telling. He simply said, "Just cause." But the operation was Operation Just Cause. So I've been thinking about that over the past, since 1989, how people play on words and how they use words to assert their power, how they use words to hide and conceal facts. So while some of you in here may be splitting atoms up at OIST or strands of DNA on petri dishes, I split clauses into their constituent parts. Should try to uncover buried intentions that the powerful camouflage by the syntactic structures of discourse. I want to try to get behind the facades that we fabricate with words and how we structure meaning. This effort is kind of like grasping for the unspoken motivations behind claims such as war is peace. Or, like mistakes were made. Now, to achieve these goals, to unveil objective reality freed from ideology, practitioners in critical discourse analysis dig into the mediated world besieging us everywhere. The major media, myth makers, are just modern-day magicians to me as I study them. They're the programmers of our reality that purport to be authentic. Now, our perceptions of what is real are the effect of what we observe in our immediate surroundings, in our environment, that which can be seen, tasted, touched, heard, or smelled. Yet, powerful illusions of the mediated world also interact with these same senses, so that we're apt to fuse the two, the mediated world with the objective world that we can sense. Now, while we trust our perceptions of this immediate world we meet through our sense organs, we also synthesize these perceptions with the mediated, the one that's manufactured by the programmers and fed to us in digital signals whose meanings we decode. Thus, we can say that we live in a world of necessary illusions. Way back in 1965, when I was a little boy, Marshall McLuhan saw it unfolding in the 60s. He said that media are artificial extensions of sensory existence. Now, I'd like to set up this talk by acknowledging the work of those who've cleared a way for research that explores the interactions between the artificial world and the artificial world and our human sense organs, and how we might be aware and resist the efforts made to rewrite our individual stories. Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, noted in 1928 that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized opinions and habits of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power. So Bernays' work signals the birth of the modern public relations industry, known as public affairs or community affairs, or simply the emergence of propaganda as a tool of organized mass persuasion. Now, appearing in Bernays' quote are some key words, the elaboration of which would clarify one aim of this talk this evening. I humbly submit that it's important for us all, whether we are civilians or servants bound by oaths to the state, to discern and understand the camouflaged threats we all face, all of us, to our freedoms and to our autonomy as moral agents. I freely admit, too, that the more research I do to understand the kind of governing powers that Bernays had referenced, the more revolting the world appears to me. So the question I sometimes ask myself is, will I exercise my freedom as a moral agent to preserve my autonomy and to write my own story, or will I acquiesce to the ruling powers to be rewritten for their purposes? It doesn't take any particular deep insight to know that human beings are largely social creatures and thus highly malleable. Even AI knows what's up. So perhaps this is one reason why Chomsky once remarked that the goal of the elites is a society in which the basic social unit is you and your TV, or us all. So before I kind of loosen up the nuts and bolts more on this talk, I'd first like to kind of explore the meanings of some key words that we found in Bernays' quote. He refers to the conscious and intelligent manipulation. Now, from this, we might infer that because we comprise part of the masses, that we are all objects of manipulation. as the so-called elites exercise their power, their self-perceived right and ability to mold us, the members of the public, to shape our knowledge, perception in ways that serve their interests. We can infer, too, that invisible government refers to a range of expressions now widely used in the public discourse. Plenty of examples to draw upon, so I'll just cite a few. That famous ideologue, Fox News on the far right, Sean Hannity, refers to invisible government fairly often, if you listen to him. He refers to the invisible government as the deep state. On the far left, automatons of the neoliberal mass media have also been using the term, while their analysis of the deep state is anything but deep. Famous corporate flak machines, manned by the likes of talented infotainers such as Rush Limbaugh, use expressions to signify the same unseen and unelected powers of the corporate state nexus. So it turns out, history shows us various hints have appeared in the public discourse that speak about these present times that we're living in right now. I'll go back just a bit to the 60s. In his January farewell address to the nation in 1961, Dwight Eisenhower, believed to have been the first and most powerful elite to allude publicly to these hidden power structures seeking to frustrate popular efforts for global peace. Sorry, it's kind of long, this quote, but it's so good, I'd like to read it to you. I should try to strike my most resonant voice here. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of the defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Very good.
Now, it's been debated too by historians that earlier drafts of Eisenhower's so-called military-industrial complex speech also included congressional as well as scientific and educational. I think that's quite fascinating. Whenever adjectives describe the nexus of interlocking interests, it's clear we are programmed from birth by the major educational and media institutions to consume the dictates of this complex, to consume its narratives, to digest the urgencies it sells in support of its principal aims. Following Eisenhower, not long afterwards, we find Kennedy in his inauguration speech of 1961. He expanded on Eisenhower's warning in a speech to the American Newspaper Publishers Association. In it, Kennedy referred to the powers of work at work in these structures and the, quote, secrecy with which they operate, which he observed is repugnant in a free and democratic society. Now, the writers and editors that Kennedy had appealed to continue to serve the complex, actually, today in multiple ways. Scarcely a word is ever uttered in corporate media of the machinations of hidden power. The question is, why should this be so? Why, if media are the true fourth estate? Why, if media are the true fourth estate, charged to apprise citizens of the most pressing issues, do we see such consistent patterns in the meaningless narratives reproduced for us for consumption? Noam Chomsky thinks all of this vacuous regimentation is a way of constructing irrational attitudes of submission to authority and group cohesion behind leadership elements. Chomsky cites our bizarre fascination with sports as an example. Maybe he's got a point. I still can't prevent myself from checking on my hometown gladiators doing battle on the gridiron. Now, let's think back to Bernays' point, though, about manipulation, though, and the necessity of organizing the habits and the opinions of the masses. Chomsky sees mass media as part of a system of indoctrination. The narratives are consistently presented for mass consumption. They offer people something to pay attention to that's of no importance, that keeps them from worrying about things that matter to their lives, that they might have something to, that they might have some idea of doing something about. That was a quote from Chomsky. Returning to Bernays, we also find a reference to democratic societies. It's important to note that democracy just might be one of those necessary illusions. It demands from us an engaged and enlightened citizenry. Decision-making cannot be left solely to the devices of the elites, even as they work to drive us out of the sphere of public debate. Enlightenment today for the masses has become a state increasingly hollowed out by the elites. When citizens forfeit their responsibility to participate in democracy, they risk forfeiting their rights, and must sometimes take to the streets to remind the elites that they are also human beings, deserving of all the rights guaranteed to them under laws. Okay, so on to the nuts and bolts here of the talk. It was Jean-Jacques Rousseau who once observed that man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. These days, he just might amend that observation. Man is born into a debt-based world, and everywhere he is in chains. This is the world at present, a place where every phone call and keystroke is recorded, every move surveilled and face biometrically measured, every effort being made to capture and marketize your DNA. I often wonder how we have come to see this condition as acceptable and justified. Having thought about the possible answers, or possible reasons, I would say we're well conditioned by major forces of social control to accept the erasure of categories between what we are, that is humans born free, and what we are fast becoming, slaves to debt. Now, while debt is the control mechanism, I would argue also that the position that media are the means by which our acceptance of this kind of control is constructed and maintained. Let us suppose, if you're not convinced yet, let us suppose we're all addicted to fried chicken. And our addiction puts us in a debt each day that wields a certain measure of control over our thoughts and behaviors. Though we might try to resist feeding the beast of our obsessions, the persistent exposure to messaging in media activates memories of previous fried chicken experiences, thus conditioning us more deeply to act on our cravings. It is a simple socio-cognitive response to stimuli, but it works. If we have not yet been dispossessed of our ability to autonomously reproduce those experiences with fried chicken, we must act first to acquire currency, the world's most popular tool of economic exchange, so as to gratify that craving. Marshall McLuhan once observed that we shape our tools, but thereafter our tools shape us. That's an interesting observation way back in the 60s, and I think it still holds true today. Tell me if you agree. Clearly, currency has distorted our attitudes. Anyone think gold teeth is sexy? No. Our perceptions, our actions, and even our religions. Anyone see Jesus in affluent charlatans? While hard currency remains, for now, a tool for economic exchange, governments and their owners, the banks, are presently reshaping currency into data. The big banks are the owners of the means of capital production. Their power to produce capital rests in their private hands, and not in the hands of the public, people like you and me. While media now work to manufacture the message that data are acceptable forms of transaction, they also work at the same time to erase categories of difference between the sexes and between species, to conflate and confuse one with the other. Last year, we caught a glimpse of the raw power of media to blur the lines between us creatures and our created things, between human beings and human creations. This message here kind of reminds me of the maxim that emerged from studies of the history of corporations. Corporate personhood is the fiction that corporations are people, while slavery is the fiction that people are property. With emancipation of the slaves in America, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prevented any state from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. So, slavery hinges upon a shared understanding of what is and isn't a person, and thus an object to be bought and sold. Is it any wonder, I ask, so there's something to think about, is it any wonder that with the newly freed slaves would also come a successful argument among the power holders in the Senate for the recategorization of the corporation from a soulless collection of self-interested business activities to a legal person? With corporate personhood, slavery was now defined and managed by private corporations rather than government institutions. And what the corporation would demand was allegiance to the top and obedience from the bottom. Now, when we set the corporation beside the colonial master and servant, we see not just an interaction of economic interests, but also of cultural and individual identity. Given the power of corporations over governments, what do these facts say about the world today, where you and I, the unique aspects of our identity, are being remade into data, into metrics in someone else's database? What do these facts say about currency, too, being reshaped into ones and zeros, the manipulation of which is increasingly being concentrated in the hands of corporate power? We can own data, to be sure, but once it becomes integrated into our bodies, it owns us. Once we allow the owners of the means of capital production to make our data a tool of economic exchange, we have accepted the fiction that we are property. We have accepted our own slavery. Mankind barely noticed, observed Edwin Black, when the concept of massively organized information quietly emerged to become a means of social control, a weapon of war, and a roadmap for group destruction. The question is, of what significance are the tools of the information age to this new global socioeconomic order? These new tools are at the very center of the emerging system of global slavery, its contours blurred slightly by the enticing imagery and language typical of exciting advancements in technological progress. The excitement of sophistication, speed, and efficiency masked the news of an impending slavery. Modern history provides precedent and context. Black identifies the computer we shape as the key machine that shapes us. Without it, leaders of the Nazi Party, for example, could not have organized and carried out their plans of identifying the Jews, expelling them from society, confiscating their assets, sending them to ghettos, deporting them, and finally undertaking the efforts to exterminate them. With the assistance of IBM's Rewritten machine, a primitive precursor to the microprocessor we know today, the Third Reich could store information on any process, individual, or location by the ingenuity of holes punched on paper cards, columns, and rows. The information age, born not in Silicon Valley, but in 1933 Berlin, individualizes statistical data. Not only can I count you as a member of the crowd, notes Black, but I can individualize the information I have about you, where you live, what your profession is, and where your bank accounts are. Perhaps the greatest achievement of encoding paper cards with ethnographic data appeared in its concrete manifestation of tattoos emblazoned on the forearms of concentration camp prisoners. The numbered tattoos were the chains that bound the humans to the Rewritten machine that parsed their unique essence into social, economic, and ethnic categories. Most categorization, observes George Lakoff, is automatic and unconscious. And if we become aware of it at all, it's only in problematic cases. Latent stereotypes and prejudices that some people hold become known only when these cognitive constructs are converted into spoken words or violent acts. Now, the problematic case of the Jews for Hitler was a dilemma, first of the mind, of an unconscious categorization that needed solving through higher awareness, of the menace he felt the Jews represented to the purity of the German people and to society. This was done partly by making unspoken feelings more overt. While serving as propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels worked through mass media to place Jews in the non-human category, as the processes of dehumanization paralleled the work of the tabulating machines that placed Jews under the watchful eyes and hands of central authorities, shaping and refining the tools for the final solution. According to Porter, one of the tasks of history is to identify the sources of what enthusiasts proclaim to be utterly new and revolutionary. Edwin Black, historian, uncovered in the historical records of IBM Rewritten machine, which had revolutionized efficiency in dealing with the tedious routines that massive amounts of census data demanded. Vast numerical data sets could at last be manipulated in ways that made abstract numbers into more meaningful portraits of real people. The amazing world of mass data integrates the weird and the banal, the conceptual with the material, and innovation with the commonplace. Black wonders why IBM had involved itself in the market of fascist death camps. He says it was never about anti-Semitism, it was never about Nazism ideology, but it was always about the money. It was, in effect, death made lucrative for a particular market. And when the love of money molds the fruit of human activity into products for mass consumption in the open market, that passionate pursuit of mammon now threatens to remake humans in part or whole into salable and disposable commodities. Referring to this process as the third wave of marketization, Michael Borovoy at UC Berkeley speaks of current markets where human body parts are sold. They have become commodities. So if imprisonment and slavery, therefore, began with Auschwitz inmate tattooed with an analog Hollerith number, as Black points out, the new slavery will end with a global concentration camp prisoner microchipped in the matrix with a digital number. I think this inexorable march toward voluntary slavery to the new order of global economics should arrive as no surprise to those who have watched uneasily the tools of big data applied to all products and commodities, both inanimate and animate. A 12-digit numeric identifier, the Universal Product Code, first appeared in '71 for items for trade. And the ubiquitous IBM design for the UPC we see today revolutionized the tracking and control of all material inventory at point of sale. Not long after, the barcode began appearing in tags for livestock. In most cases, a mark or brand on an animal is prima facie proof of ownership. But today, the mark of ownership is the new IBM Sony personal cell chip, a radio frequency chip that's, as they say, smaller than a grain of rice and implantable under the skin, not only in livestock and our pets, but more importantly, in humans. Clearly, the chip is the new totalitarian tattoo hidden in the hand. Since we hastily perceive that money has some kind of intrinsic value and thus unquestionable power over us, we overvalue time as expressed in the circumference of a clock dial. We literally see time each day passing away, fear we aren't doing enough to capture this abstraction made into a commodity, aren't using this dimension of life wisely enough. We thus embrace speed and efficiency as a way of rescuing the time we sense that is slipping away from us. Speed and efficiency, mere concepts we make into the links in the chains of technology binding us to this daily toil, the concepts that colonize our minds with worry. In The Truman Show, I believe 1998, you guys seen The Truman Show? It's a good one. In The Truman Show, the interviewer asks the director, why do you suppose Truman has never come close to discovering the true nature of this world? The response offered by Ed Harris's character is quite instructive. I had it in a slide, but it's a different version. That slide, the quote is, "We accept the world that is presented to us." Sorry, I'm trying to do my best, Ed Harris. So I'll say it again. So Ed Harris's character responds to the question of the interviewer near the end of the film. He says, what did he say? We accept the world that is presented to us. Something like that. So, I lift my cup this evening to our shared search for a way out of Plato's cave, and conclude with what I think is a fitting quote. Thank you. bibliographies, if anyone wants. Thank you. Okay.
If you could just stay with the question, just repeat the question so everyone's hearing it.
Any, would you like to talk about? Yes. Thanks.
I just wondered, when you say things how, like, the situation we find ourselves in is a result of the elites having power over the rest of us humans, and I wonder to what extent you see our situation as being a product of a nefarious group of individuals, and how much it's the case that this is just the way a capitalist system will always play out when you have these representatives.
Well, that's a great question. I think if you look back through history, you can see nefarious individuals on both the right. If we assume that the right is, say, capitalist and the left communist, I think in my research, it seems to me that we have nefarious, powerful people in both, say, spectrums, both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, I'm really interested in media and how the media environment, how it shapes our understanding of the world. And I mean, look at the mass media, look at the corporate media. The bottom line is profit, monetary profit. And so you have to ask the question, who is creating or reproducing the world, this mediated world, and for what purpose? Why are so many people across the planet dispossessed of the ability to reproduce their lives? I think if you start digging below the surface of, say, Fox News or MSNBC, the major myth makers, if you go to alternative sources, you begin to see, say, patterns, to be able to connect the dots and to understand what is mediated reality and what is maybe more objective reality. I hesitate. I hesitate to put a name to. I use the word elite, just like you, but it's very difficult for me to really describe what is elite. See, that's the problem with language, right? My concept of elite, it might be slightly different than your concept, but maybe we share some interconnected meanings of what elite is. But it's hard for me to define what elite is. But I do see that when I study the media, the mass media and alternative sources, there is a way to, there's another way to understand the world that is not mediated. It's not presented to us for mass consumption. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think it's probably also the case that people, there are
To our detriment.
So I'm a really direct person. I don't really like to tiptoe around language. I like to speak multiple languages. I speak multiple languages. Basically, the word you're tiptoeing around is conspiracy. And you use the word elite, and it's kind of the real root of the question is it being done with intention, or is it just the natural state of progression? Right? So do you think alternate forms of media is an outlet, somewhat of an escape from this? It's kind of inevitable.
I think it's a natural response. The rise of alternative media seems to me to be a kind of natural outgrowth of our, it seems like our collective incredulity of how the world has been unfolding. It seems like our social interactions or our social cohesion has fractured over the past 10 years, or at least since the rise of social media. It seems to me that alternative forms of media or information or journalism are just natural responses to, say, the bullshit. I'm using bullshit in a technical way. Harry, if you're interested in bullshit as a whole philosophy, a Princeton philosopher. It was a Princeton philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, who's written a very short tome. He's talking about bullshit, and it came out in 2005. It's really good. And I think that alternative forms of media are just natural responses to what we seem to see as a lot of bullshit that is flooding the public discourse right now. I just happened upon an article a couple days ago. I thought about weaving it into the talk, but Harvard has just come up with a list of, in their library, right? Big research library. Harvard has come up with a list of alternative news sources that are verboten for researchers. And it's really interesting, the kinds of control that are now being, how the debate, the public debate, is becoming more and more narrow, right? And I think that's because the people who are the so-called programmers or the writers of the narratives, the major narratives, they sense that maybe they're losing control. They see it every day in the media, the online media, right? They see these people, citizen journalists springing up here and there. There are so many sources, news sources that are coming out, and I think that's a natural response to what people are sensing about the world. Yes.
I sense that there's kind of not as well, like this, the way that you presented this tonight is so thoughtful, and I feel like in the wider world, there's been a turn away from conventional media that's not thoughtful, that is kind of like more of like a knee-jerk, like they're the bad guys, we're not going to listen to them anymore. And I think that, like from my point of view, that knee-jerk, they're the bad guys has been pretty negative because of all of these turning towards alternative sources that are not factual. And I'm wondering if you also see that as a negative, or if there's some way to like help people turn away from these very corporate sources that are maybe a little bit more manipulative, but help not find like fake sources.
What was the last part of the question?
To help people not end up
Not be duped by fake news? Well, that's a great question. One that I've been rolling over for quite a long time now, at least since the election of Trump. Who, I mean, if you think, I don't know, if you think about Donald Trump, I have personally, may I vent?
Please do it, sir. No, please.
I haven't, when the first time that I saw Trump, I think it was on Letterman, when Letterman had like a late show. It was back in the 80s. And I found him to be creepy, and even back in the 80s when I first saw him come out in public. But what's really interesting to me, though I have no interest, or I have no connection, scarcely any connection whatsoever. His policies don't really resonate with me, but what's really interesting to me is, despite this incredibly negative person, he came out and said something quite extraordinary, which was, he called CNN fake news. Now, if you study media, public discourse for any length of time, you realize that Trump, despite his weaknesses, his moral weaknesses, he said something quite exciting and interesting, something that media scholars have been saying for a long time. So, though he is noted for not telling the truth, he told the truth. So.
But if you tell the truth by accident.
It's really easy to pile on Trump because, President Trump, because he's that kind of character, right? That's a really good point. Maybe he finds CNN doesn't align with his politics. Right? Okay. So he calls them out, calls them fake news to try to undermine their integrity. But if you look back at CNN's reporting over the past number of years, decades, you see that so much of their production is worthy of Hollywood. It's some of it you find is Oscar-worthy, Academy Award. I cited the example of Nadia. Remember the three slides here? You guys remember that?
Wait.
Problem, reaction, solution. So you had, I don't know if, does anyone remember this? This kind of like production. It was, I saw it. This was shortly after I left Panama. And I was like, wow, the story that she told was completely outrageous. Anyone familiar with it's the old babies thrown out of their incubators, only to die on the cold floor in hospitals in QA City. Man, that story really hits you. And to see her act it out was just, wow, very powerful. And then you had our fearless leader, not long after, come to the media, CNN. These are CNN productions that really changed public opinion, manufactured consent, as Chomsky would say. So there are many, many examples in the corporate media, and it really doesn't matter if you are, if your politics is on the right or it's on the left. The production quality is just really impressive. So I dig into alternative sources. You might recall 2013 when Edward Snowden came out. So he had this amazing story. Edward Snowden is really interesting because here he's kind of like here's a guy who sacrificed himself essentially, revealing the story about an agency that was breaking the law, and he revealed it to us. Now, how many of you in here know what Edward Snowden is doing today? Does anyone care? My students have no idea who Edward Snowden is. They don't know about 2013. What was going on in 2013? So here you have maybe another example of how alternative stories or alternative narratives are marginalized. They put in the periphery so that we can kind of ignore them or forget about them. And that really has, that kind of production in corporate media, that has a really negative effect on the strength of our democracy, right? Because citizens have to be informed. We have to know.
The topic of your discussion tonight was rights or being rewritten. So, would you comment on the writing part?
Yeah.
Because I'm being led down this road that social media is 128 to 256 characters, and is this your concept of writing?
No. Sorry. You might be referring to Twitter. I don't do Twitter. Is it like something like that? Robert? Is it 128?
44.
Okay. Other platforms allow more discussion, greater development of discussion. For example, Facebook. The point about writing is I wanted to give some props to another researcher and writer, Douglas Rushkoff. His name appears in the bibliography. He just came out with a book. It just came out like two days ago. It's titled Team Human. It's a pretty cool title. He had written a book many years ago. I think the title is something, or program or be programmed. So I wanted to kind of draw attention to his work by titling mine in the same spirit. So programmers are writers, they write code. But I write for a living. And I think every human being has a narrative. We have our own stories, right? We're free, we're born free. And we are unique individuals, and we should be encouraged to preserve our autonomy and agency by, I'm kind of using it metaphorically, but to write our own stories and not have our stories be rewritten or written for us. I think that's the point of the title. Yes.
Maybe somebody can help me out here, but I listened to a podcast called Zigzag, and the two, the speaker and her producer, joined a media company that is tied into blockchain. Have you heard of that?
I heard of Zigzag, but I haven't heard any details about it.
What the blockchain media does, it democratizes media, and so that quote-unquote fake news can get voted out. But the blockchain system keeps everything on a fair playing field. I don't know if anybody's heard about that, but it seems like really they're asking people to join, and it's for a good sum of money. You have to invest to be a citizen of this blockchain community, but then you get to vote up and down, and everybody has the same equal votes.
Direct democracy.
Direct democracy. But do you see that as a
potential?
Yeah.
To enlighten
to
the public?
keep
as a countervailing force.
To keep media honest.
I don't know that I'm a little more cynical about saying we have that ability. Keeping the media honest. I don't know if I've gone that far.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't say that. But it seems like Zigzag is showed that if it's connected to direct democracy, then it seems as though that ideas that are worthy of the public discourse will remain. They will be embraced.
Yes, I think that's the point, is that they're trying to get the nefarious elites or whatnot. I mean, if you have a direct democracy, which no one and no system has ever been able to achieve, I think.
Right.
I think, that there is safety in numbers. And it's a high bar to become one of the voting members.
Yeah.
But it seemed to me that that was a form of writing, this coding, that can be done, that would allow, a source of media to shine through.
I'll look into that.
I just want to thank the speaker one more time. So thank you everybody for being here, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
And I think that if anyone has more questions, we'll probably have conversations offline.